I had a faculty member once when I was a graduate student who told us about this hypothesis. And it was that babies store vocabulary words inside of their feet, which sounds silly, but actually, if you think about the data, it has a lot of truth to it. Because if you look at timestamp one of a child and you count the number of words they know and you measure their foot in centimeters, and then you come back 6 months later and you count the number of vocabulary words they know and you measure their foot in centimeters, and you do that for timestamp 3 and 4, you will see a positive correlation that as their foot length increased, so too did the vocabulary. And you can't store a foot inside a vocabulary. That doesn't make any sense because we can see their feet. It must be the case that they are storing their vocabulary inside of their foot. Now, again, this is a very silly hypothesis that's trying to show exactly what this QRP is showing. That if we only look at one possible hypothesis, at one possible explanation of the data, then sure, we can find all kinds of ways to try to validate what we have found. The problem here, though, is if we take maybe a second closer look, we'd also measure something like hand size and vocabulary, or height and vocabulary. What we'd hopefully find over time is that what we're measuring is that vocabulary increases with growth. That just as babies are growing older, that they also are learning more vocabulary. And so what this professor was trying to show, I think did a really good job of doing this, is that we need to think of alternative ways of how we'd actually respond to a question of like, why does foot size and vocabulary grow at the same time? It's not because they're related, it's because another third variable is of that of age is related to both of them. And so in any kind of a science, when you are trying to explain why a thing works, what you really want to do is you want to try your best to eliminate every other variable possible. So you want to make sure, well, it can't just be foot size, because again, we saw height and hand size and all those kind of things. So maybe language or vocabulary have to either be dispersed to the body, which is a new hypothesis that we could try to eliminate, or any of that kind of stuff. Or let's imagine that we look at adults whose foot sizes don't get bigger as they learn more vocabulary. And so we can start to use this sort of a practice of having a hypothesis, but trying to imagine not just any explanation, because any explanation isn't going to be enough. What we really want to know is if an explanation is going to be backed or not, and if it has some sort of scientific validity. And so, yeah, whenever you are doing your data collection, you want to think of as many different possibilities that could take down your hypothesis. And if you can't think of them, or if you can't eliminate them, and you keep testing and retesting a certain hypothesis over and over again, and it continues to be the most valid one, then that increases our confidence in what you found. And that's the basics of science. And so if you don't do those things, you're definitely committing a questionable research practice.